This is a walkthrough of an experimental app I made called Automadraw that lets you move around on this grid with keyboard controls. It's part of this constraint systems project that I have where I make alternative interfaces for creating images and sometimes doing text layout. Often involves keyboard control, often grids. And very Vim inspired. So the Vim text editor has specific movement keys, and most of those are active in this. So to get into the app, there's these two cursors. This is the draw cursor, which lets you draw or erase. And then the green cursor here lets you run a selection of cellular automata. The first default one is Conway's Game of Life, which is the most famous cellular automata. It uses neighbors to determine if a cell gets colored or not, or lives or dies, is how it's put. And by default, Automadraw is loaded up with these shapes. One's a spaceship that I guess transforms into a glider when it hits the wall, which is kind of cool. And another shape that does that little dancing thing. They all have names. But yeah, so that runs those, and then you can also draw your own things. Squares, 2x2 squares are kind of inert in Game of Life. But if you draw a line, that does some stuff. Some of the other ones I kind of seeded over here are also ones that are especially interesting. That one really expands out. And this one also expands out quite a bit. There's a few other automata. So if I go to the next one, it's called Flow, which is maybe not as like algorithmically interesting, but kind of interesting in the interface. So you press it and it flows in the direction you choose. Just all those pixels, they'll stack up on each other. Kind of like a falling sand thing, but falling sand usually runs off to the side too. And finally there's Langton's ant, where this little triangle is the ant, and it tries to move forward, and then depending on if the square is colored or not, it turns and flips the square. So those are the automata stuff. I mean, I wanted to experiment with automata. I think one of the interesting things that came out of this is this two cursor setup, which kind of came out in the development. And you can move each cursor independently, so you toggle back and forth to move. But then even when, especially, it's usually the at automata cursor is not highlighted, you can still run it. Which created some interesting interactions where I can sort of, there's the cat in the background making some weird noises, draw with the draw cursor and keep this running. So in general, I'm going to clear it back to default. What should you do with this thing? You can do anything you want. I think it's interesting. One thing is to really explore Game of Life. I can now draw a glider from memory, but that's probably about it. You can make a glider gun, which is this self-reproducing glider thing. So you can look up Game of Life patterns and do that. And because you can run it a step at a time with the key press, it's kind of nice to go through. And you can even screw up your glider by adding something to it in the middle. But then I think the larger thing I was interested in was collaborating with an algorithm to do something. And this is sort of, as most of the constraint project systems are, very scoped down. But hopefully as I explore this at a pretty, I don't know if it's really basic, but low level, where these squares are only black and white, and the automata are limited to ones that run on those. There's not a lot of states. You can get a feel for these interactions through that. And then you can imagine how this might be an image editor. I might do it on an image editor at some point. There's actually this like not great feature where I can load an image into it, and that's Chris. The way I did it was I just thresholded it so you can't see that much, although that was kind of a cool effect. But there are automata that are just take advantage of RGB, like for color states, and there's one linked in the release notes, a video demo of some of those, and we'll probably try at some point to do an image editor with also this like region-based cursor that you could then run through a bunch of automata on that image or sections of that image, and you'd sort of end up like, it's a lot like a glitching tool, image glitching tool, where you'd run over certain areas. A few things I want to highlight about the two cursors. One was kind of fun, that has to do with, this is all written in JavaScript and this HTML canvas element, and I've made a bunch of these grid drawing apps, and sort of found out, because it also often involves multiple key presses, I had to look up how people handle that, because keyboard events, it's set up, you know, sort of understandably, if you hold a bunch of keys together, those keyboard events, you can't count on each individual keyboard event getting through. Modifier keys are built that way. Shift and Control at least have like a separate little state setting because they're expected to be pressed with other things. But I'm using these like Vim controls, so you might be holding H and J at the same time, or more likely you're holding the draw D and moving around. So the way people handle that, you make an object that's a key map. You set each key if it's pressed down on the key down event, and you take it off on the key up event, and you can count on those coming through. But as a key is held and pressed, which is a common occurrence here, that's a repeat key event, and the way it works basically is that the last key pressed, so I press D, I press L, then that repeat key event is going to be saying the key is L that whole time. It's a little confusing to walk through. So as long I can use that, I know a key is repeating, because I have that key map, I can check them both. I'm fine, I can know what's going on. But actually led to some weird, interesting effects, especially for the automata. So if I press A, this is running the automata and it's repeating, so it's just going, going, going. Now if I press a direction button on top of it, it moves it, and then that A repeat is now like gone, kind of, even though A is pressed down, which I didn't really realize was happening. It's maybe a bug, but it's sort of nice, because then as I press directions, automata will run exactly once, and it kind of gets this sliding feeling. I'm going to clear it. This is probably like the easiest reproducible thing to do on here with Game of Life. That's kind of cool looking, is to draw some lines, make what I think of now as a sweeper, hold A down, it's not doing it because you can't really see, then get it into that mode where it's running once per movement, and it kind of sweeps down over these, and you get a lot of like symmetrical, interesting things. So that was fun, and that's part of what I look for in these, is like interesting things that come up during the process. That's the main thing I want to highlight. And some other features. I showed the load image. Pretty much all of these now you can save the image, which will get you the canvas or the image without the grid lines or the cursors. I'm not going to save it right now. And actually the way it's set up, you could load those images in and continue editing something you'd already started if you want. You can also, that's toggling the help, you can toggle the grid. Undo. I got undo and redo working, which was kind of a pain. I guess I just moved this around a lot while I was talking. There you see some actual stuff. That gets into the code structure. I'm used to React, and I used to write these in React, and now I try and do them in just JavaScript, but still a very like React-based process. So there's like a state, and basically undo just walks you back through a state. But it's kind of cool because I think compared to some other things, the cursors are so tied into the app itself that this really feels like a full replay that I can also stop and do something else of what happened in a way. And it's kind of because it's keyboard controls too, and the keyboard has, those cursors have to move like every step of the way, where if somebody was using a mouse, they'd like, you could jump from one section to another, and that probably wouldn't be represented in your undo redo because I don't know, that would just be a lot to store. It's not a, sort of because it's not discrete movements on the mouse part. The mouse is all over all the time. But I also thought that was fun, and there's probably something else to be done there. There's more to explore there. That's almost it. The resizing cursor, I've done this a few times and I try and put in work. So like resize goes into resize mode, and then you use these same movement keys, which I guess I haven't talked about exactly. So the HJKL are the Vim movement keys, which once you're used to them are really great. And there's a lot of apps that make use of them as well. If you're not used to them, there can be a stumbling block. So I do allow the arrow keys as well, but I'm always used to using these in Vim mode. You can move around with those. You switch to resize. It's those same keys. This is also influenced by the window manager i3WM is kind of how this works. You can use those same keys to resize. So I try, and I'm always experimenting to like really keep you in flow. So reuse some of the things you already know and make it feel logical, even though like all these decisions about controls are ultimately arbitrary. And this time, I hadn't been meaning to do this for a while, I did get Resized Canvas working as well, which does the same thing, and like programming data structure wise, probably one of the harder things I did here was get it so that resize can crop and you don't lose all this stuff that you crop out. You can go back and get it until you accept these changes. You can also add to this side or this side, and that again was, I wanted to try and keep you in flow and keep you on the keyboard and feeling good. Yeah, that is the run through. Run a little ant in here. I guess I kind of talked about the limitations, but I think this is fun to play with as far as drawing stuff. I mean, I would love to see what you draw with it, and I think there is, you could do some stuff, but it is a little bit limited because these pixels are so big, and they're only black and white. As far as like representational things, you can't do a lot. And I think that was a fine decision for this one, but kind of like I was saying, I think maybe an image editor would be interesting where you could go in. Yep. So that's Automadraw.constraint systems. This is the constraint systems project in general. There's now 15? Yeah, 15 apps that you can try out. There also is now a gallery that shows what people have made with it. And if you make anything, please send me a message with it and let me know, and I'll put it up, definitely. And that's it.